Incoming transmission.
The Klingonese phrase of the day is "So Nuk."
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise.
So, this is a huge victory for the good guys.
Scotty, beam me up.
Resistance is futile. Live long and prosper.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Greetings and welcome to the Computer Resume podcast, the show covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old. I'm your host, writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. He is a science fiction author, comic book writer, and commentator, known for his work in Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, and the Star Wars franchise. He's also done extensive research into comic book circulation history as presented in the Standard Catalog of Comic Books series and his website, Comicron. From his secret lair beneath the snowy tundra of Wisconsin, it's John Jackson Miller. Yeah. Hey, John Jackson Miller. Hi.
Glad to be here.
Man, I'll be honest, this is kind of a big moment for the podcast because we've been working through the entire chronology, but we have yet to get anyone who has written a chapter to come talk about their chapter. So thank you so much right off the top for coming in. And along with that, thank you for writing such an amazing book. It's for anybody who doesn't know, it's Star Trek Strange New Worlds, The High Country. So right off the bat, I want to ask you, do you consider yourself a cheesehead?
No, I moved to Wisconsin 30 years ago, and I came from down south where we had basically nobody else to root for except the Dallas Cowboys. And I was here for about a week, and the guy running the print shop in the company I worked for called me into the office one day. I didn't know why I was in trouble because I hadn't done anything, but I was wearing a Dallas sweatshirt, and I was told very, very, very quickly and tersely, "Don't wear that here again." So that's, and I never did.
Oh yeah, there was a time, God, way back when the wife and I were considering moving from South Carolina to Chicago, and somebody quickly told us, like, look, you got to pick teams, Sox, Bears. Mm-hmm. You got to figure it out and have that down before you get here. Your life's going to be miserable. So, getting into sort of your background, how did your childhood sort of pop culture consumption influence your work? Like, what were you into as a kid, and did that kind of give you that spark of creativity? I'm always curious to ask this about folks.
I started collecting comic books and drawing my own when I was 6 years old. My mother was a grade school librarian, so she didn't throw my comics away. She encouraged me to put them in order, and so Star Wars hits when I'm 9 years old, and so I immediately go into that fandom for the next 6 years. Star Trek is a slower burn for me because at least at the beginning, it's only available in randomly slated episodes in syndication. But then, once we start getting, the movies appearing regularly on cable, then we finally get Next Generation by the time I'm in college. That gives me a chance to actually watch a series from the beginning. And so, I joke that I'm strip mining my childhood for a living. I had access to a lot of cool stuff, role-playing games, video games, certainly comics, fiction. The first grown-up comic book I ever read was Star Wars #1. The first grown-up novel I ever read was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, another Star Wars thing.
Nice.
But I had all this stuff from the beginning, and so I've sort of been soaking in all of this for a very long time, and then I was able to work that into my career, going through, I was the editor of my campus newspaper, both in high school and in college. Then later on went to work with Don and Maggie Thompson, who ran Comics Buyer's Guide, which is the weekly newspaper for the comics industry.
Yeah.
And that led to, that was where I started on my magazine work and nonfiction work for comics. And then I ended up meeting all the people that got me into writing comics professionally, and then writing novels professionally.
That's awesome. And what a great time to be working in the industry with, a deep well of knowledge and fandom for you that goes back to single digits for you. You mentioned TTRPGs, the tabletop role-playing games, and those have experienced a big resurgence here within the last decade. Have you revisited that? Is that still prevalent in your life at all?
I was never a player in the very, very early days. Yeah, I played Dungeons and Dragons, but I generally would end up either running the games or ruining somebody else's, because I much preferred, to actually create. And really, in part because of the lack of players, but also because I was seeking structure, I moved out of being a role player to, somebody who was into war games, the Avalon Hill victory games, kind of games, the ones that take 3 hours or 3 days or 3 weeks to play.
Oh yeah.
That nobody plays anymore because be better managed by computer.
Yeah.
But that was something that still came in handy when I went to work for the company that where I did the comics magazines, because I also ended up editing the magazine called Scry, which was the collectible card game magazine. So
Yes.
I was able to write big encyclopedias about card games like Magic and Star Wars and Star Trek, and so that fed into other things. And I did eventually get to do some role playing writing for Wizards of the Coast. I wrote the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide with my three colleagues on that for the Saga edition of the role playing game, and then I wrote a single module for one of the campaigns they had. And I never did any more because it was the most work for the least money.
Yeah.
Role playing is just very, 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 very hard work. Creating a character stat block for somebody who's like 20th level and having to walk them all the way through it is like doing one's taxes.
Yeah, it is.
And it might be 200 words, but it would be 200 words that would take you a day.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm a forever DM myself, and the group that I that I run has said specifically more than once that their whole goal is to just mess up whatever I've created for them that session. Yeah, it's really tricky. I think now is a really interesting time, especially since, I mean, D&D, obviously, the most prevalent medieval setting, the whole thing, but there's so many that are modern day or turn of the century or space adventures, all that stuff. So all of that comes into play, and it's really a lot of fun. So let me ask you, and then we'll move on from TTRPGs. But you mentioned that you did write a module for one of them. You've written comics, you've written novels. What's the spectrum? Like, I don't want to say like easiest to hardest or like most fulfilling to least fulfilling, but like if you had to sort of rank them in terms of cost benefit type analysis, how would you place those three?
Well, I mean, the work involved in each is just different. Writing a comic series is like sailing a ship, because you're tossed on whatever winds are this way or that this particular month or that particular month. And you may, because of other things going on in the publisher or the franchise or whatever, you might have to tack this way or that with your story. The length of the story that you get to write might change while you're actually in the process, so you might have to change your route. A novel is much more like a moonshot. You are doing a thing that's going to keep you away for a long time, and it is very difficult to break away in the middle of it and do other things. I just discovered this again, as I frequently do when I'm writing a novel and have conventions or something in the middle of it. or have to promote something in the middle of it. So that is there. So the dynamic is just different depending on what it is, work wise. And yet again, which I prefer. Well, I would have preferred, for example, the novel that I just wrote, Batman Resurrection. I would have preferred to have gotten that done entirely in the winter, and I just didn't get an early enough start on it because of other things. And again, the reason being is that's when you're not traveling and you're able to knock it all out at one time.
Since you mentioned it, and I won't dig, I won't press, but just to let you know, for me, before Star Trek, there was Star Wars. Before Star Wars, there was Batman.
Oh yeah.
I'm a hardcore Batman kid. I'm still a hardcore Batman kid. To cap it off, I have a tattoo that I'm not allowed to show anybody anymore.
Quite all right.
So along with writing also comes editing, and you've done a fair amount of editing as well, yes?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So what for you, we talked about what you prefer in terms of types of writing, but what's more fun for you, writing or editing?
Again, it depends on what it is. I mean, editing my own work, I'm able to actually relive it and fine tune things. And I generally tend to proofread myself as I go because I've just been doing it so long. So I tend to turn in clean copy, usually, or relatively clean.
Nice.
So that is fun. One of the nice things is that one of my proofreaders is my former colleague at the Comics Buyer's Guide, who also happens to be a Star Wars, Star Trek, and Batman aficionado. So he's both beta reader and also proofreading me the same way he used to proofread my articles, and I would proofread his back in the day.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's from anything that I've written, which is looking at your resume is a drop in the bucket compared to yours, but also doing stand up, there's kind of the brain dump period of just every idea out on the page versus crafting the story, which is the editing process. And I'm getting to a point, maybe it's because of age or maybe it's because of experience, I've done it enough times, where the brain dump is fun, but I'm getting into the shaping of the thing, the crafting it, the honing it, the refining, the polishing it down. Like I'm getting into that more because I mean, at least with stand up, the editing process is done in front of a crowd. So it's a really interesting editing process. Anyways, so we've talked about different things that you've written, and looking at your resume, which is very extensive. Congratulations, that's awesome.
I'm just old.
Experienced, seasoned, a veteran.
There you go.
You worked on Iron Man for a long time, but it was just prior to that first movie in the MCU. How do you feel about the way Tony Stark is portrayed or was portrayed in the comics versus how they ended up portraying him in the film, meaning like alcoholic Tony who kind of gets a little bit of a redemption in becoming Iron Man, although he still struggles with it, versus the MCU where in Winter Soldier, Tony basically admits to Cap that he's addicted to being Iron Man, which is, I think, might actually be way darker. Like, how do you feel about those two portrayals?
When I wrote Iron Man in 2003, so it was after 9/11, I decided that what I wanted to do was take it back to the 60s, back when Tony Stark was involved with the Defense Department and showing up in front of Congress. And, he's sort of the, Howard Hughes figure more directly than we see later on. And by that point, he had arcs where he had gone through his various struggles with addiction, and then there are whole years where that is not part of the character's story. And what I decided to do with my gear is establish or at least play onto it that his real problem is he has very little experience with failure. He has very little experience with people saying no to him and then accepting it. And so in my year on the series, I wanted to put him in a situation where I make him Secretary of Defense, and he's trying to become the Secretary of Defense. And, there's he gets turned down by the Congress, he gets turned or by the Senate initially. Yeah, and then dealing with the Iraq War, which was literally happening while the series was going on, so we included it.
Yeah.
He finds out that he's not able to get done all the things he would like to get done.
Mm.
And so I looked at his other struggles as springing in part from this route that he doesn't fail well.
Mm.
And so it made sense that they would tackle that in the movies at one point. It is a fun thing about the movies that I do believe that they drew significant inspiration from our year on the series. We know that our year on the series was given to Jon Favreau because he hired our cover artist Adi Granov to be the armor designer in the movies, or one
Nice.
of them.
Yeah.
And then also they pulled character names out. So, for example, you've got Christine Everhart, who's the reporter that we see in the first and second movies. She comes from my year, and then it must get passed around at Marvel or at the MCU because Sonny Birch, who is the villain in my series, he's the character that Walton Goggins plays in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And
Okay.
that time they actually flew my wife and I and the artist they brought it from Argentina. We just had to come from Wisconsin to go see the premiere, and so that was really cool.
Oh.
But yeah, no, everything they draw on the collective, everything that's out there, and yeah, we had a sliver of that, and that was cool.
Yeah, talking about, taking a brain dump and then whittling it down. I don't envy these folks who put together these movies of having to cram 20, 30, 40, 50 years or more down to 2 hours. Like,
Exactly.
oh my God, that's a daunting task. But so let's get into Star Wars. You wrote Star Wars roughly, and feel free to correct my dates, but I think roughly September of 05 to December 2012.
Yeah, those are the release dates, or not the release dates. Yeah, actually, those are the release dates.
Okay.
Yeah, I went from Iron Man to doing Star Wars. Did the Knights of the Old Republic series for all 5 years of it. So that was 57 issues.
And that was for Dark Horse.
That was for Dark Horse.
Okay.
Yeah, that was 1,344 pages, all in one part of the timeline that I had helped to develop. And then I did a novel and 3 comic series called Knight Errant, which is a different part of the timeline. Lost Tribe of the Sith. I did that book, and then also a comics sequel to that. And then that led to me getting other full-length novels like the Kenobi novel, Obi-Wan Kenobi's First Month on Tatooine, the New Dawn novel, which is the prequel to the Rebels TV series, and then other short fiction leading up until the book that just came out last week, which is the Living Force, which is the first novel featuring the entire Jedi Council.
That's so cool. Yeah, so going from Iron Man and Star Wars, like, what's it like jumping into an established universe? I mean, the old adage of like, how do I break into the comics industry? Make a comic book. Congratulations, you're in the comic book industry. But like jumping into something that's already well established, I think can be fairly daunting. Like, how was your experience getting into that?
Well, in a sense, working in these shared universes is somewhat similar to you're talking about role-playing games. You're
Mm,
writing an adventure in a setting where you have source materials and you have things that you need to try to stay within the lines on.
mhm,
And even with Iron Man, I've got callbacks from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s in that storyline. And again, why was it easier than it could have been? It was because I read it all. I've got every issue. And then likewise, Star Wars, I only had to read up on the things that had come out since the movies that bore upon what I was doing.
mm,
Star Trek, it's been a little more challenging just because there were whole series that I missed, years on because they were on the air while I was, freelance writing, moonlighting, or something else,
mhm,
or just working nights or something like that. And so there are stretches of Voyager that I've never seen. There are stretches of Enterprise that I've never seen. But I figure that I'll eventually get to it. And of course, if it's something that I need to have input from, or I have something that bears on it, I call up that episode and I watch it. So of the 8 Star Trek novels and 1 novella that I've done, they've had elements that have come from episodes that I previously had not seen until I was doing my research. And then, of course, I have things where, the episodes aren't out yet. And so I'm working with the folks at the streaming series, principally Kirsten Beyer. She is the author of the Voyager novels, and she is executive producer of Strange New Worlds. And so she sort of functions as an intermediary, helping us to guide our work in one direction or another.
That's awesome. As a quick side note, we have been desperate to get in touch with her and have begged and pleaded and put our prayers out into the ether. If it ever comes up that she goes, "Hey, I'd like to go on a podcast," please consider dropping our name. We would be so grateful.
I think I've been on 1 podcast with her. I know that life got really complicated last fall with the writer's strike because she is still a working writer, but
right.
That I think is past.
Well, she's been, turning out good work. And, when I watch the episodes and see her name come up, I go, "Oh, there she is." Yeah. So we talked about, you've worked in different shared universes, established universes. You've done, novels and, extended prose and comics. But when we come to Star Trek, I got to ask, do you have a Star Trek comic script in you?
I have talked to IDW on and off every so often, every few years. It's just a matter of scheduling usually, and they've got a core team, and Kirsten is actually contributing a lot of the work for that as well. It's a little harder to slot a comic book series around a novel because it's an ongoing effort that sprawls a little bit into each month as opposed to something which is compact.
Yeah, and I've been privileged enough to talk to a couple of folks with IDW and a couple of folks who have done other comics as well. It's a bonkers schedule, so I can imagine like trying to promote one thing while work on this one thing that is actually several things. Like
the last series that I did that was more than a couple of issues. I did a 40th anniversary series for Battlestar Galactica. Based on the original show. And again, that was fine until it ended up overlapping a Star Trek novel. And then things got interesting.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Okay, so I am chomping at the bit to ask you unspoilery questions about the High Country. I don't want to, leave anybody out in the wind. So as we do, let's get to this week's recap.
Brought to you in part by our Patreon supporters, Rev J, Jerry Antimano, Cosmic Crit, Kitty B, David Willett, Ed Milner, Fleet Admiral First Class Fred Sims, and Ren, Space Monkey 73, and Steph Overman.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
Okay, folks, I'm not actually going to spoil this book, but I will read the inside of the dust jacket for you. Cue the music. When an experimental shuttlecraft fails, Pike suspects a mechanical malfunction, only to discover the very principles on which Starfleet bases its technology have simply stopped functioning. He, along with an away team consisting of Una, Uhura, and Spock, are forced to abandon ship in a dangerous maneuver that scatters their party across the strangest new world they've ever encountered. Una finds herself fighting to survive in an untamed wilderness where dangers lurk at every turn. Uhura struggles in a volcanic wasteland where things are not as they seem. Spock's missing altogether, and Pike gets the chance to fulfill a childhood dream, to live the life of a cowboy in a world where the tools of the 23rd century are of no use. Yet even in the saddle, he's still very much a starship captain, with all the responsibilities that entails. Setting out to find his crewmates, he encounters a surprising face from his past, and discovers that one people's utopia might be someone else's purgatory. Pike must lead an exodus, or risk a calamity of galactic proportions that even Enterprise is powerless to stop.
Hello, this is Elizabeth Dennehy from Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Picard, and you are listening to Computer Resume Podcast.
Okay, now, so my first question right off the bat, you've got some interesting things that you've done with chronology. I went and looked up all of your Star Trek novels through Memory Beta, and it looks like the High Country is maybe the only one, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that is super specific with where it falls in the timeline. Every one of the other ones seems like, oh, it's before this series, or it's, during this time, but High Country is kind of like, hey, it takes place between this episode and this episode. Like, that's really specific.
Really, we kind of try not to define things if we can help it. But here it was a case where logically it was important to know that the High Country, which of course is one of the reasons we're talking about it now, is it's out in trade paperback here in the month of April. The High Country takes place during season 1 of Discovery, and it must take place, after the first few episodes where Una is in trouble because she's reinstated, and it must take place while Dr. Mabenga's daughter is still aboard the ship in the systems. And so that constrained it relatively closely like that. And then I looked at it and I said, okay, I know what neighborhood they are in, after the episode where they get hijacked, and I want this to be relatively late in the first season, so I made it as late as I could make it and still fit everything, because I wanted, in particular, we knew we wanted Hemmer in the book, because that was a case where Kirsten said we absolutely want Hemmer because he's so cool. This character's voice. You want to try to write the character if you can. And once I saw him, I fully agreed. And I wanted to write Hemmer after the crew would have known how to respond to him, what he's like. So there's more of a familiarity in the way that they communicate with one another. And so that's how it is. And so, we did drop that in between, I think, episodes 7 and 8 of season 1.
Yeah. And I always had that in the back of my mind, but as I was going through it, I was like, oh, okay, that references something before, or that's, giving some foreshadowing to things coming down the line. I was really impressed by that. So, again, trying to steer clear of spoilers, but you reference a previously explored
Planet episode.
There's an episode that gets brought back into focus during the High Country, and to me, I was kind of surprised. I was surprised and impressed that you brought that back. Was there different parts of the established franchise that you were like, oh, I'd really like to include this aspect, or this particular alien race, or this setting, or something along those lines?
Almost everything that I've done, I bring in an episode of the show or one of the shows to spin off of it a little bit and elaborate more on it. I think the very first thing I did was Absent Enemies, which was a Titan novella, and that called on the episode The Next Phase, where Geordi and Ro are out of phase with the ship. And that left many questions for me, and I said, well, I can make an adventure out of this where I will also get to tackle some of the fun questions. Then likewise, my Takedown novel, there's a specific episode, which, again, if I told you what episode it was, it would spoil the book.
Of course.
that there's a particular, race that we haven't seen except in that one episode that is behind all the shenanigans in Takedown. The Prey trilogy was something I did where I'm playing off of my favorite Klingon episodes, Rightful Heir and Sins of the Father. And I'm also playing at the same time on Devil's Due and all the stories of illusionists that have appeared in Star Trek in that trilogy. And so I just continue sort of doing this. Enterprise War, I don't really do it with, but then Enterprise War is set entirely during the first season of Discovery. So there are constant references back to what's going on back home that we're missing. The Die Standing novel, it ties back into Obsession from the original series in a significant way. And then my Rogue Elements book, my Picard book, that was something where it has major connections to, and this is not a spoiler because it's right on the back cover, it has major connections to A Piece of the Action. which is the mobster episode where they used all the sets from the Untouchables that they had lying around the Desilu Studios.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to do was I wanted to actually use that as a springboard to talk about various Star Trek stories about cultural contamination, and just as a springboard to talk about books and the power of books as you see them in Star Trek. Because obviously a piece of the action is a case where a single book changes an entire culture.
Oh, yes.
So here we have High Country, and without getting into the surprise episode that this ties into to a great degree, we have a novel that really deals with the idea of dislocated or kidnapped peoples, relocated parts of civilizations.
Yep.
So we have this patchwork planet that Pike and crew are stuck on, and we get to deal with those questions, and then the larger questions of this society, which is a utopia that is working for most people but not for everybody.
Yeah. So all you Trek detectives out there,
yeah,
comb through the last few minutes and see if you can figure it out, or just get the book because it's amazing. So speaking of the book, and we've talked a little bit about technique and how things are written and the time frame you have to write them in and how challenging that can be. One of the things I noticed about this, the length of the story, and I noticed that while High Country isn't necessarily longer or shorter than any other novel out there, when I think about a script length, and the old adage of like 1 page of script is 1 minute of screen time.
Yeah.
And the average shortness of your chapters, you've got 371 pages, 79 chapters, which means your chapters are really short. Could you tell us a little bit about why you chose to write such short chapters? I mean, because it's, like I said, it's standard, but as in flipping through it, I was like, oh my gosh, these are really short chapters.
It's also really small print in the paperback as opposed to the it's actually High Country's print is even smaller than in Rogue Elements, which is the same length. Actually, High Country is slightly longer than Rogue Elements, but it's 16 pages shorter because they were having the paper crisis at the time, and so they shrank the type a bit. No, actually, this is kind of engineered. One of the things that we've learned over the years, particularly as people are consuming these novels more by audio than they ever have, as audiobooks. One of the things that we realized is that there's actually metrics about this. There's also metrics, people reading on Kindle, how long they read during sessions. And so, when you get chapters that go 15, 20, 25 minutes, you don't see that on television. You don't see that on the radio. People have to take a break. People are actually consuming these stories while commuting. And they have to be able to stop what they're doing and pick it up again, and kind of know what's going on. So how that has affected my writing is I've tended to go shorter, not in every single book, because depending on how much atmosphere I'm putting into the story, I would still make the chapters longer. In the case of both High Country and also the Star Wars novel I just did, The Living Force, where I had 16 major characters. I had the entire Jedi Council, plus Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and a couple of others. I needed to actually make sure that everybody had their turn, and so we have a story that is, by being shorter with the chapters, it gets kind of a kinetic thing going on where we're with Pike. Then we're with Una, we're with Pike, then we're with Uhura, then we're with Pike, and then we're with the villain. We ping pong back between these, but we still have the through line with Pike, and I'm slowly going to be bringing all these characters together. So again, not every story is probably set up to be done that way. I will say another thing, and I just did a social media set of posts about this a couple of days ago, is that with the exception of Strange New Worlds, all of my Star Trek novels and the most recent Star Wars novel, The Living Force, have what we call locator subheads. So under chapter 1 it says aboard the Regal Zephyr hyperspace in Star Wars, in the Living Force. And in all my Star Trek novels, it would say, I think chapter 1 of Enterprise War is USS Enterprise, Pergamum Nebula, or it'll say orbiting something, or here or there. I do these always at the top of a chapter in these books in order to help the audiobook listener get back in. And it's a scene setting thing. And, you wouldn't necessarily do it in every kind of a story. I actually am not a big fan of it when it appears on TV or in movies, because your eyes will tell you that you're looking at Dagobah or wherever. That's all you need. But when it's just your ears, and in particular in a book like Living Force, where you've got 16 major characters, and it takes place on an archipelago that we've got a map in the book, and there's 13 islands on it. It really helps just be able to say at the top, Esafaki on the planet Quen. Now it's noteworthy that, again, it depends on the story. In the High Country, we don't do that. I have just chapter titles to make it feel more rustic and more like a pulp, because I kind of want it to feel that way. Why don't I have locators? Well, you probably already know. Even though this book is full of maps, it is the first Star Trek novel with planetary maps in it. All the cast are lost.
Yep.
And I don't want them to know where they are.
I know. I keep going. It's like, they are eventually going to find each other, right?
Yeah.
That's so great. So you mentioned, and we're getting close to the end of our time here, so I want to make sure we have time to do plugs and everything, but I just want to ask one more thing about how you kind of came into this style of writing shorter chapters. Did you have to transition to that from your early work to this? Was that a struggle for you?
No, I came from comics, and comics are already very, very, as I say, kinetic, but very, you'll go 2 pages and you'll have a cut.
Yeah.
I look, other people would end up, combining them together and just having, asterisks or something there to break it up. Again, I find that it's a little easier if I can actually stick with the same point of view character for the entire chapter. The only time that's not really possible is when I'm in a battle scene or something where I need to show both sides. In the Living Force, I don't have the locator subheads in the middle of chapters, even when I break from one character to another. But I have done that in the case of, for example, the Prey trilogy, where I have the Battle of Gorojanto, which is basically the Battle of the 5 armies, except it's fleets. Because we've got the Klingons, and we've got the rogue Klingons, and we've got the Enterprise, and then we got the Titan, and then we've got over here we've got the Romulans and the Breen. Everybody's there, and so I'm having to hop between ships in the middle of battle sequences, and so I did end up inserting that we're now on the Klingon ship, we're now on this, we're now on that, we're now on this, because if you take a single battle, I mean, look back on the battle over Kittimer in Star Trek VI.
Oh yeah.
Which you've got cuts going on from now we're on Enterprise, now we're on the Klingon ship, now we're on Excelsior, now we're down on the planet. That's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And you can't spend a 2,300 word chapter just with the Klingon saying fire.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, I mean, and this will be my final question. We've talked about, for over 120 episodes of this show about this franchise and other franchises that have held a mirror up to society and shown us something that maybe we were either scared to confront or reticent to confront for one reason or another. But science fiction always seems to be the place to do that. And Star Trek has been like the front runner in that effort. And I read something in your book, and I just wanted to get you to expand on it a little bit. This is a quote from a character. I won't say who, I won't say the context, but I think it speaks for itself. This is life, my young friends. We all look out from the limited perspectives of our times and our surroundings. You either choose to expand your perspective or you act as the villains keeping everyone blind. It is the definition of a game. Lives lived, but to no end. And I did a double take and I read that paragraph again. And I was like, wow, in a few words, just it boils it all down. Can you expand on the call to action that
Yeah.
science fiction gives its consumers?
Well, science fiction and fantasy and superhero stories, these all give us a chance to actually, and have always given us the chance to talk about our world and our lives and our challenges through a lens that puts us in a safer remove. Yeah, just like Rod Serling and Twilight Zone, it's something where you're safely enough away, and it gets silly to try to politicize Star Wars or Star Trek or anything else like that, because nothing has an exact equivalent. There are stories that you can actually boil down and say, okay, this is really a story which is about X and Y and this thing happening here. But it was never something where you could say, aha, this is all a Cold War metaphor all the way along. And when you do get moments that are too much ripped out of today's headlines, it can be a little jarring. And so, for example, there would be, in my New Dawn book that I did for Star Wars, I have a character that is part of the Empire surveillance state. And people said, "Did you get that from Edward Snowden?" And I said, "No, I got it from 1984."
Yeah.
I got it from Orwell. This is something that this society would have.
Mhm.
And I was writing about how the Empire had taken existing surveillance tools that were just commercial in the Republic and had corrupted them, and showing how things evolved and how things change. And again, it's a sandbox that allows you to deal with these different things. And I think one of the other fun things about it is it allows you, because there's so many different characters and so many different things. The character I know the character that you're referring to that gives that speech, and that is a character who, when I initially wrote that character, I was like, okay, this character is going to be hostile to our characters, is going to be stuck in the past, is
Yeah.
going to be exactly as her people were 100 years earlier.
Mhm.
And I said to myself, you know what? No, she's been stuck on this planet for 100 years. She's been observing. What has she learned?
Yeah.
And what she's learned is she wants no part of the society that is available on this planet, or that is in charge on this planet. And she also doesn't believe she has the force or the ability to put it down, or the right to put it down.
Yeah.
And so I like that we can come up with characters that are not you don't just read Klingon and no villain. You don't just read Romulan and no villain. You actually are able to show that characters can learn.
Yeah. Oh man. Well said. Thank you so much. John, thank you so much for taking the time to nerd out with us a little bit and let me pick your brain about your career and your process and all of these things. Do you have any parting thoughts for us? Anything about your work in the franchise as a whole, your experience on the Computer Resume podcast? Any parting thoughts before we go?
Well, thanks, Todd. As I mentioned, I'm at the end of the release week here for my most recent Star Wars novel, and of course we just announced my new Batman novel, tying in with the 1989 Batman movie. It's a novel sequel that takes place between Batman and Batman Returns. Yeah, just basically that I think that people want to see more. They've always wanted to see the characters on screen. What else can we do with them? What would their lives be like? What would it be like if you had Captain Pike on a planet on a horse for a couple of weeks? What would that episode be like? And we talk about these novels sometimes being movies or cinematic or whatever. We also have cases where I think anybody who would look at Enterprise War or Prey or any of the things I've done for Star Trek, these would never be movies. These would be seasons of a show.
Oh yeah, yeah.
These would be seasons of a show, and likewise, I think with the High Country. It's been said, I think Neil Gaiman said that books are not movies, movies are not books. They have their own special powers, and what we try to do is we try to take what's on screen and give it the comics touch or give it the novel touch.
Thank you so much. Well, folks, in 2 weeks, on May 27th, we will be joined by Heather Wood, the founder and host of To Proudly Go, New York City's weekly Trek-themed drag show. Heather will be here to discuss Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 8, The Elysian Kingdom, which is available exclusively on Paramount+. John, where can people find all the details about all of your works, and where can they sign up to get pre-orders and all of the things? Please give us all the details.
Star Wars: The Living Force is available now, hardcover, audiobook, and ebook at your local store, Amazon, or whatever your platform you like. Likewise, the new novel Batman Resurrection, hardcover, audiobook, ebook, October 15th. There are pre-order pages already up, and people can find them on my pre-order page on my website, farawaypress.com. And I also have behind-the-scenes notes on many of my stories there. Social media, on Twitter, JJM Faraway. On Facebook, it's John Jackson Miller. John Jackson Miller also on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok.
And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials. From all of us at the Computer Resume podcast, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in 10 Forward.
Support us on Patreon and like, rate, review, and share on all your favorite platforms. Feel free to send us your subspace transmissions to computerresumepodcast@gmail.com or at Computer Resume on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The Computer Resume podcast was created and produced by Mr. Todd A. Davis. Our logo was designed by Will Martin and Justin Bishop. The opening theme was produced by Justin Bishop, and our outro music was provided with permission by Dronode. Additional music was provided by Mr. Todd A. Davis and Gary Horn, and the voice of Computer Resume podcast and executive producer, me, Kat Davis. Hashtag LLAP. We'll see you next time.
Going through a Star Trek. We're doing Star Trek stuff in space. We probably got some phasers and shuttle pods, and we're gonna find a brand new race.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?